Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope this video finds you doing very well today, wherever you are in the world. Today, I'd like to talk with you, if I may, very briefly about some thoughts that I have with respect to a recent Blu-ray release from the Criterion collection. It is of a film that is already currently in the collection as a DVD, but Criterion very recently, this month, January 2020, released it on Blu-ray. This is Spine 515. This is the film from 1960, directed by Sidney Lumet. The film is The Fugitive Kind. As I indicated, this film is already in the Criterion collection as a DVD, which is right here. This is the 2-disc DVD, and I will talk about the features in a second, but it looks like everything has been ported over, and it looks like this is the same transfer that we see on the earlier DVD that is now found on the new Blu-ray. It is still a very good presentation of the film, and the picture quality and sound quality I think is very good. So if you want to get the DVD version, I think it's worthwhile. If you want to get the newer released Blu-ray, I think it's also worthwhile. It depends on what your own preferences are as far as physical media collecting and formatting are concerned. As for the film, or the Criterion Collection release itself, I should mention that together with the actual film itself, The Fugitive Kind, which I'll talk about in a second, there's also a long interview with director Lumet, and it's called, in the Criterion supplement itself, it's called Lumet's fourth film, The Fugitive Kind, and it's a one-on-one interview with director Lumet, where he talks specifically about this film and certain production stories, certain episodes that he encountered with the various actors of the film, etc., including, of course, Marlon Brando, who is the star of the film. And he has some very interesting stories about working with Brando, working with Anna Magnani, working with Joanne Woodward, and also working with Maureen Stapleton and others. And also, of course, collaborating with Tennessee Williams, or Ten, as Sidney Lumet refers to him occasionally in the interview. And what's really remarkable about this interview, it's remarkable for many reasons, and because of this, I would strongly recommend that you take a look at this interview if you haven't already. But what's really remarkable is that Sidney Lumet has such a great memory for specificity as to what occurred, certain episodes of production. And he also has a great generosity about him. He's very giving in his comments even now. He is very, for instance, when he's speaking about a certain aspect of Maureen Stapleton's performance, and he had to do a little bit of editing, which somehow removed some portions of her performance as V. I think he, even in this interview right now, expressed some he expressed being a little bit sorry about that, because it seemed somehow to affect, or it could have the potential of affecting what the viewers thought would happen to her character throughout the course of the film. It didn't take away from her performance, he insists, and I agree. Her performance is among the cast. It's really fantastic. But that's an example of how generous I think Sidney Lumet is during this interview. He's also very direct and very honest, as he is when he's talking about his work with Anna Magnani, and also he's talking about certain episodes with Brando. And for instance, there's a very famous monologue that Marlon Brando gives Val Xavier's, talking about the bird, the so-called bird monologue. And he's speaking about how it seemed to have been there was a difficult episode, or there was some kind of difficulty on set, but the two of them insisted, or there was an insistence that they try to get through it, and ultimately it resulted in quite a remarkable remarkable kind of sequence. It's probably one of the most memorable sequences of the film, due in large part to Brando's delivery and performance there. He also talks about other aspects of Marlon Brando's performance that I thought was really, really interesting. He talks about the quirkiness of Brando's choices. For instance, there is a moment during the film where Sidney asked Marlon Brando to do a little two sign, and like there are two types of people, that sort of line. And instead of doing this, what Brando did was he did this instead, which was a very inspired choice, as Sidney Lumet, I think recounted. And so that indicated that not only was Marlon Brando a very creative actor with creative choices, but he also kept his fellow filmmakers, Lumet of course included here, on their toes. And so that was a very interesting comment that Sidney Lumet made. He's also talking about certain production aspects, the cinematography, of course, by Boris Kaufman. He's talking about specific aspects of the lighting, etc. And I think that is a really there are some really powerful moments of lighting here that I think are really well discussed in this film. There are two moments in particular. I don't want to go into too much detail, but they involve Marlon Brando on the one hand and Anna Magnani on the other hand. And they are two stellar moments of the film in terms of the film's lighting, and a very lyrical and poetic and quite a brave move in terms of cinematography and the way that lighting shifts in mid-scene. So these are examples, I think, of how insightful and wonderful the interview with Sidney Lumet is on this release. So it's worth checking out. Then there is another almost 30-minute interview piece. This is with two people, sort of historians and experts on Tennessee Williams, Robert Bray and R. Barton Palmer. And this supplement is called Hollywood's Tennessee and the Fugitive Kind. And this is great because it focuses on Tennessee Williams, who of course provided the underlying source material that became the basis for what became the film, The Fugitive Kind. The initial incarnation of the play, The Battle of Angels, and then its later incarnation, Orpheus Descending, of course. And what Robert Bray and R. Barton Palmer talk about is they talk in essence about Tennessee Williams, his relationship with Hollywood, his and how it coincided with his rise in fame as a playwright, as a very successful playwright, starting from around the 1940s onwards, for more than a decade. And it also talks about Tennessee Williams' plays that were adapted into film, included in which is The Fugitive Kind, and also talks about how Tennessee Williams reacted to the film, certain aspects of the film, and how he felt after the film was over. There's an interesting anecdote, or a collection of anecdotes that are recounted here about how it seems that Tennessee Williams was a bit capricious, in that on certain times he would have publicly been very much in favor of liking the film, and then in later interviews later on in his life, he was known to have been somewhat critical of the film and Sidney Lumet, and then maybe much later he would have been publicly very much in favor of Lumet and The Fugitive Kind, etc. So he seemed, at least in public anyway, on certain occasions later on in life, years after the film had been released. He seemed to have a little bit of a love relationship with the film itself. But I think ultimately the supplement is suggesting that Tennessee Williams was very much in support of this film, and he was supporting of the choice of Sidney Lumet at the time. And the two gentlemen in this interview, I think, are very interesting in their comments in that they talk about the choice of Sidney Lumet and how at the time he was known as a realistic director. Remember, this is not so far after, for example, take 12 Angry Men, for instance. And so this is a director known for his quote-unquote realism, assigned to make a film about Orpheus descending, which in terms of its play version is very much it's a very lyrical piece, and it deals a lot with symbolism and the like. Well, the two gentlemen in this interview seem to suggest that their reading of the film is that it has a realistic bent, at least more so than the play itself. And I find that to be an interesting take, especially considering that we do have moments in the film that seem to take on this lyrical bent, if you will. I referred earlier to certain moments of the film where the lighting seems to go on and off almost magically, and that is definitely bereft of any sort of attempt to capture any kind of realism on camera. So it's an interesting take that these two gentlemen have, on the one hand, in this interview about Tennessee Williams, where they seem to suggest that Sidney Lumet's approach is one of realism, maybe respectively so compared to the play itself. On the other hand, Sidney Lumet in his interview seems to be suggesting that at least in certain key moments of the film tended to stray quite away from realism, at least in certain key moments of photography. So I think the combination of these two interviews is really quite fascinating and very, very helpful. And I should say more broadly, this interview about Tennessee Williams is incredibly helpful for anyone, such as myself, who might not necessarily be completely expert in the field of Tennessee Williams and his work. So this also gives a kind of background or quick overview of the other key works around this time, so it's very easy to keep up with this, and also it is very it also helps to explain or to justify the kind of style and approach that we see in this film, and I'll get to that in a second, which is very sort of upfront, in your face, some might say quite almost animalistic in terms of its focus and the way the characters express themselves with language and body language and sexual overtones and the like, and also the way in which men and women seem to relate with each other or collide against each other, and that's the nature of and leads to other things like jealousy and sexual tension, and also a yearning to belong, and also trying to do good in a world that might not necessarily be such a good place. Hence the basis of the film itself, Orpheus descending. Right. So. This is to say that I think these interviews, I think, are incredibly helpful, and they're long and they're filled with a lot of information, so it's really great. And then there is the next supplement here, which is the Craft Theater hour-long episode from 1958, 3 plays by Tennessee Williams. And this is interesting because this is actually 3 short one-act plays that in total comprise 1 hour approximately. And it's interesting for a number of reasons. One, we have, these are directed by Sidney Lumet, and they are 3 sort of short stories in a sense. It's almost like an anthology. And we have the first play being Mooney's Kid Don't Cry. This is with Ben Gazzara and Lee Grant, the two of them. And they have this wonderful, intense dynamic between them. It's really great. And then there is the second of the three, which is called The Last of My Solid Gold Watches, with Thomas Chalmers, Gene Saxon, Alonso Bolsan. And then there's the third, which is This Property is Condemned, with Zena Bethune and Martin Houston. So this is, and they are all quite intriguing to watch. And this whole package is great. And two, we have to recall that Sidney Lumet, in directing this, also had some comments to say about these some of these one-act plays in his interview in the Criterion Collection Blu-ray. And he talks about how, for instance, in the third of the three, This Property is Condemned, at least in Sidney Lumet's eyes, these are almost like prototypes or precursors, if you will, or relations to characters that we might see in other Tennessee Williams plays, such as A Streetcar Named Desire, Blanche Dubois, in a different incarnation as seen in the play This Property is Condemned. At least that's how Sidney Lumet seemed to take it, which I think is a really fascinating take. So very interesting. It's well worth your time if you haven't seen that already. Also, check out Tennessee Williams. He also appears at the very beginning with an introduction, and he also gives some voiceover every now and again to introduce the players. And it's interesting, it's nice to hear his voice and to see his visage and to see his persona on screen, as it were. He is very, he has a very beautiful way of presenting. Although there are two moments where he kind of flubs his lines, which is a really interesting thing. It's live television, I suppose, so you should check out at the very beginning. He seems to talk over the narrator at one point, so it's a pretty interesting thing. And then at the very end of the broadcast, we have the commercials, which are really great. Check out the one in particular for Cracker Barrel cheddar cheese, and there are the three types, right? The sharp version and the gold aluminum foil, and then the extra sharp in the red aluminum foil, and then the mellow, which is in the silver aluminum foil version. So anyway, so that is the Kraft Theater, three plays by Tennessee Williams. A really fascinating watch and well worth one's time. And then we should go to, before we go to the film, let's also go to the booklet, which is right here. And this has a number of interesting things. This has the essay called When Sidney Went to Tennessee by David Thompson. And it does talk again about the production history of the film in certain aspects. I would say it's a nice supplement to the information that we hear from the two interviews that are included on this disc. Really great. I should also say that there's a section of great stills, as you can see right here and right here. Really great. This also has some sections that are, I think, very complimentary, in particular to Maureen Stapleton, and also discussing Anna Magnani and her approach and her issues as she was trying to work her way through this material, and also her kind of links with Tennessee Williams in other plays and other aspects, and also touches on the significance of Anna Magnani in this role as Lady Torrance. And so it's really quite great. And again, it's a nice supplement to the information that was also provided by, I think it was Sidney Lumet in his interview. It also talks about Joanne Woodward, and also talks about Marlon Brando. It also makes reference to the famous bird monologue, which I talked about earlier. It also talks about how Marlon Brando was busy during the production of this film because he was busy, according to this. His life was full of troubles at the time, and He was going through a bitter child custody suit pending, and also, as a further distraction, the essay says he had to fly back to Los Angeles from the East Coast on weekends to help with post-production on what would prove to be his only directorial effort, One-Eyed Jacks. So that's an interesting piece of information as well. And that's an example of how well-packed this essay is by David Thompson when Sidney went to Tennessee. So highly, highly recommended. And then we can go to the film itself, and I think I don't want to say too much about it lest I spoil it for any of you who haven't seen the film, but I think when we're talking about The Fugitive Kind, we are talking about a film that is based on, of course, the play, or it's adapted from the play by Tennessee Williams, and in fact there were many different versions of the play, in fact, and then it turned into this film. And so there might be a kind of upfront theatrical element to the way in which the performers perform and give their dialogue and move around within a particular scene. But I think that's to be expected, because there is a certain style and way of presenting emotion and feeling and contrast and also drama and collision and tension when we're talking about the world of Tennessee Williams. And so I think that's comes to be expected, that comes with the territory. And also there is a great deal of tension between the characters, whether it be a kind of jealous tension, sexual tension, a kind of hopelessness or a yearning to get out of a sense of hopelessness. This is expressed, of course, through many characters here in their own unique, quirky, and very individualistic human ways, of course. And it's also sort of made, I think, acute by the way in which every character seems to revolve around each other. And of course, at the center of this is of course, the character of Val Xavier, played by Marlon Brando. There's many references perhaps to his name, how his name Xavier with an X sounds like Savior. Also, there might be interesting references, whether it was intentional or not, we're not sure, to Saint Valentine. He wears a snakeskin coat, and he's also there's a sense of hopelessness about him, but he seems to be attracting a lot of women in this town that he finds himself in. And so that also creates a certain bit of tension that leads to developments in the narrative that will end up creating quite significant critical moments in the narrative that will bring the film to its conclusion. But not only do we have the character of Val, but you also have Lady, who is the sort of the female lead of this film, and her relationship with Val forms the one of the emotional cores of the film, shall we say. And it's her kind of yearning and also wondering and trying to make sense of this world that doesn't make sense to her, trying to protect herself in a world that is very cruel and very cold and filled with many dangers, as we'll find out. And so it is in this state of mind that Val comes in, and so we have then the development of the relationship that, as I indicate, forms the emotional core of this film. It's a dark film in many respects. It is a film that is dependent on mood and atmosphere, but also on the kind of in-your-face rawness of the performers and the way that they perform and the way that they leave everything to show. And they create all these emotions, and everything is on display. And I think that is on purpose, a kind of acting style that I think is employed, but it's everything is on display for us, the viewer, to absorb and to react to and react against, and to make up our own minds about who is right and who is wrong, who is morally superior, who might not necessarily be, or maybe we might change our minds during the course of the film, who knows. But the landscape that is being presented is one that is very cruel and very cold, very hellish, one might even say. And so it is in this landscape that we see our main characters and how they are trying to, in their own way, deal with the situation, fend off the horrors and the ordeals that they have to fend off, whether it be Joanne Woodward's Carol, or Anna Magnani's Lady, or Marlon Brando's Val, or Maureen Stapleton's V, or others. There's a sense that each of these characters is going through a kind of inner struggle that is made outward and very direct for us, the viewer, to fully appreciate and to fully sympathize with. And we sympathize with these characters to the point where ultimately it takes us to the final conclusion of this film, and we are left to wonder what is to happen once the credits roll. It is indeed a very powerful film. It is a film that is, I would say, very heavily stylized in terms of the way it seems to be theatrical, but I don't want to say that it feels like a three-dimensional theatrical portrait, if you know what I mean. It doesn't feel stagey, but it feels like the characters are on display. They feel like that they're on stage almost performing, but that's I think the nature of Tennessee Williams and his style, or the way in which films that adapt Tennessee Williams plays successfully tend to adapt or adopt this kind of style, which I think is very apropos and thus very effective in terms of presenting information and presenting nuance and emotion of a human character. So this is a very stirring work, and it's, as I say, it's quite heavy, and it is also quite lyrical and very beautiful in moments. There are moments of really dark realism on the one hand, but they're punctuated with moments of poetic levity and sort of photographic bravura that elevate this film beyond a mere stage play adaptation, as good as those can be, of course. But it really turns it into, as I indicated, a kind of three-dimensional experience that is certainly worth one's attention. So, my friends, that is, in a nutshell, my take on the Fugitive Kind release by the Criterion Collection. Once again, this had already been a DVD at Spine 515, so it had already been in the collection already, but now we get the new Blu-ray release in January 2020. So whatever your preference is, my friends, whether it's DVD or Blu-ray or otherwise, this might be worth a look. If you are a fan of Sidney Lumet, it might be worth a look. If you're a fan of the actors here, such as Maureen Stapleton, Joanne Woodward, Anna Magnani, Marlon Brando, this is definitely worth checking out. If you're a fan of Boris Kaufman's cinematography, this is definitely a film to check out, because the cinematography is stellar, absolutely stellar. So there are many reasons to want to check out this film if you haven't already. And to top that, the Criterion release comes with these great supplemental features. I suppose the one thing I should say is, or two things I should say to conclude. I would have liked to have seen an audio commentary, but then again, the earlier DVD didn't have a commentary, so perhaps it wasn't worth to get a new commentary made for the new Blu-ray. I kind of get that, I know, but that maybe then is an indication of, well, it would have been nice to get a commentary for the earlier DVD perhaps. But in lieu of that, we do get the two great interviews, as I indicated, one on Tennessee Williams in Hollywood and one by Sidney Lumet himself. And also, just a quick note, this booklet in the Blu-ray, which I've pulled out here, is mirroring almost identically the booklet that is from the DVD. And I'm just a big fan. I just want to say this. As much as I like the fold-out leaflet style, I like the booklet with the staples. I just like that method. It just feels it's easy to read and it's easy to go through the essay and the like. And so I just like the fact that we're getting the staples here rather than the fold-out version. As much as I like that, I just tend to like the stapled versions even more. So again, it mirrors the earlier DVD booklet, which also was stapled. So there you go. So with those little details and minutia out of the way, let me once again say that there are many reasons to check out this film if you haven't already. And so with that, if you are interested, please please try to find this film and check it out if you can. And if you do, or if you have, and if you're interested in letting me know what you thought of the film, please feel free to leave your comments below in this video. I'd love to hear what it is you have to say. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now, and thank you very much for watching. I hope you are all doing very, very well. Take good care of yourselves, and until we meet again, please be happy and healthy, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. My dear friends, thank you once again, and cheers.